A 115-107 loss to the Grizzlies for the Sacramento Kings as they just could not cope with the size of Zach Edey inside. 32 points, 17 rebounds. I knew coming into this game that Zach Edey was going to get his. He was going to have a good game against the Kings no matter what. But it was just about, can you limit that as much as possible? And the Kings could not. And it didn't feel like that was the game plan either. It kind of felt like the game plan was to limit Jaren Jackson Jr. more than Zach Edey. And I'll get into that. I don't really think it was the right game plan. But the Grizzlies just made the Kings front line look incredibly small. You know, Drew Eubanks starting this game against Zach Edey. Keegan Murray having to guard Jaren Jackson Jr. And then off the bench, you know, it doesn't get much better. I mean, Maxime Renaud put up a little bit more of a fight against Zach Edey than Drew Eubanks did, but still not great. Having your rookie kind of skinnier center go up against this behemoth of a man in Zach Edey. And it's also a domino effect. The Kings not really having the length or size on the wings. That lets the Grizzlies get downhill easier. It lets the Grizzlies get the ball into the paint easier because the passing lanes aren't as disrupted. So it all affects the Kings' ability to guard the interior, not just the one-on-one matchup inside, the help not being just quite as long on the backside. That all affects the Kings' ability to guard a guy like Zach Edey inside, and he dominated. The Kings still had a shot in this game. It was a very back and forth game, and it was just the Grizzlies ending the game better. The Kings had the lead in the fourth quarter, and the Grizzlies were the ones to go on the run to end this one. And you know, I gotta be honest, I just did not love the coaching in this game. And really, it was two things about the coaching. One, the rotations. And I think everyone can see that. Everyone can really just see it from the plus minus, where all of the guys on the bench are a big positive. All the guys in the starting lineup are a big negative. And you started the game and the Grizzlies go on a run. And then you started the third quarter and the Grizzlies go on a run. So that's a part of it. But then it's also when your bench then comes in and gives you life and gives you that energy and goes on a run and gets you back into the game, then you don't stay with them for the rest of the half. And that happened in both the first half and the second half. Now, the center position is a different story because Maxime Renaud stayed in the game and closed this game instead of Drew Eubanks. But that's something we've been seeing. And it's something I talked about where it's like, are we just going to play this game until Sabonis comes back, of Drew Eubanks starting the game, then getting subbed out, never seeing another minute until the start of the second half, where he plays a little bit, gets subbed out? Like, what are we really doing? I think it's dumb. I think they should just make a change to the starting lineup, because Drew Eubanks obviously is not playing as well as either of your bigs off the bench in Precious Achiuwa or Maxime Renaud. So why is he starting? Because I think it's clear Doug Christie thinks the same thing. He thinks that his backup bigs are playing better than his starting big man. That's why they're playing more minutes than him. So why not make the change in the starting lineup? But then the other part of the coaching that I didn't like in this game was the game plan revolving around Jaren Jackson Jr. Because although Jaren Jackson Jr. has been solid, especially as an isolation scorer, I've seen JJJ plenty of times kind of shoot his team out of the game or have too many turnovers and play his team out of the game. And so the fact that the Kings were kind of so focused on defending him and throwing numbers at him when it felt like it really wasn't warranted. And they did this throughout the game, even when Keegan Murray was on him sometimes, but definitely when other guys would get matched up on Jaren. That's when the Kings were throwing numbers at him, and they were doing it in times where it didn't make sense. Drew Eubanks was going to double Jaren Jackson Jr. or show him a body, or, be further off Zach Edey to make sure he's there for the help. And that's just getting Zach Edey easy buckets inside. I would much rather have Jaren Jackson Jr. prove himself, because I think it's more likely that he's going to shoot the Grizzlies out of the game than if you're just giving Zach Edey wide open layups and dunks. So those were the two things, two parts of the coaching that I didn't love. Now, the thing that I did love was how many turnovers the Kings were forcing on that defensive end. Against a Grizzlies team that doesn't have a lot of ball handling, without Ja Morant, without Scottie Pippen Jr., the Kings were able to force 23 turnovers and scored 25 points off of them. That's compared to the Kings only having 8 turnovers and only conceding 7 points off those 8 turnovers. So that is amazing. And that's how the Kings were able to stay in this game, because this season, just putting it plainly, the Kings' half-court offense has been garbage. Absolute trash. They need to be a transition offense team. Just looking at this starting lineup, Russell Westbrook, Zach LaVine, DeMar DeRozan, Keegan Murray, Drew Eubanks. As much as DeMar DeRozan is a half-court offensive player, nobody else in that lineup really is. And the way that it fits together doesn't make sense in the half-court because you're relying a lot on DeMar DeRozan and Russell Westbrook to be your catch-and-shoot shooters. Now, a few games ago, or a few weeks ago, I should say, to start the season, really, Russell Westbrook was shooting great on catch-and-shoot threes. His three-point numbers were amazing, and so it was fine. It was working just fine because he was a good catch-and-shoot shooter. He was actually a threat from outside. DeMar DeRozan, a little bit of the same. But what happens when they aren't shooting as well, and that was bound to happen. Russell Westbrook was bound to take a step back in terms of his three-point shooting. That's happened, and now he's out there being a catch-and-shoot three-point shooter. There are just so many moments where the Kings kick out to non-shooters. They kick out to Russell Westbrook, and he's missing all of his threes. They kick out to Precious Achiuwa. They kick out to DeMar DeRozan, and DeMar did make some threes, especially in the fourth quarter, I think it was, when he hit two of them, or maybe that was towards the end of the third. We'll get to it. But I think that's one of the biggest problems with the Kings' half-court offense is Russell Westbrook's three-point shot falling off a little bit here, and then not making an adjustment in terms of the rotation, playing Keon Ellis only in the first half and none in the second half when it feels like he could so easily slot in. And I've talked about this previously in this season where Keon Ellis can slot into some of those Russell Westbrook or DeMar DeRozan minutes. And in this one, it definitely felt like it could have been the Russell Westbrook minutes when Russ isn't playing well defensively, which he wasn't, and when he's also not knocking down the catch and shoot three, and that's kind of his role offensively, then why not play a guy like Keon Ellis? But instead, he only plays in the first half. Or why not play Monique Clifford, although he was getting into foul trouble? It's starting to get to the point where I think that the Kings, they're like Damian Lillard. They don't want to run from the grind. They want to get themselves into a deficit to start the game. They want the other team to shoot really well from three to start the game. That's like the only explanation for the way that other teams shoot against the Kings to start games. The Grizzlies started out a scorching 5 for 5 from three in the first quarter. It is insane. Every single game this happens, the other team starts out absolutely scorching from three, and then they completely cool off. They started 5 for 5 from three. They ended 9 for 24. This happens every game. Again, I really have to look into these numbers about the Kings' three-point defense in the first quarter versus every other quarter because it's getting insane. The Kings defensively were just completely outmatched. Edey dominating on both ends, getting on the offensive glass, blocking shots. Eubanks had a couple of dunks, yeah, and he also had a nice contest that allowed Keegan to come from behind and get a block. But he was completely outmatched down low. That was completely clear. The thing that was keeping the Kings in this game was the transition offense, and that can be said for pretty much this entire game. LaVine came out with a quick 7 points, had a three, had a couple of transition buckets. It was a very fast-paced game. The Grizzlies were getting up open three-pointers. Cam Spencer was just coming, once he came into the game off the bench, he was coming around screens way too easily. The Kings were going under him. After he'd already made one, LaVine went under a screen. So he had 2 threes early. Jalen Wells had 2 threes early. And the Kings dug themselves into a hole. They got themselves into a pretty big deficit. And so then the bench has to come in and save the day. And boy, do they ever. I've noticed in the first half, the Kings very much go, especially in the first quarter, with an all-starting lineup unit and then an all-bench unit. So the Kings go from that starting unit to a unit of Malik Monk, Monique Clifford, Keon Ellis, Precious Achiuwa, and Maxime Renaud. And that unit was great. After the Grizzlies had gone up by as much as 9, the energy that bench unit came out with, especially from Malik Monk, but really everyone, was amazing to watch because they were getting stops on the defensive end. I thought the biggest part of the run from the bench was just the active hands. Malik Monk throughout the game, his hands were incredibly active. We know Keon Ellis is going to do that in his limited 6 minutes. Maxime Renaud has very active hands, especially when he's in the drop coverage. He is constantly getting his hands on balls, getting steals or getting deflections. And we saw Max get scored on a ton playing in the drop in the pick and roll just because they were throwing over to Zach Edey. But when they didn't manage to just throw a lob to Zach Edey, or when, say, Jock Landale was in the game, then you could see the impact of Renaud on the defensive end. It was just obviously a tough matchup there. But everyone was active, forcing steals or just forcing misses and then rebounding. One of my keys coming into this game was guards rebounding the basketball. And Malik Monk came in, and in the first half he had 4 rebounds. And it wasn't just that he was rebounding, but that he was getting those rebounds and then immediately pushing the other way. And it wasn't just him, but it was also Nick Clifford doing the same. And Nick went to a nice Euro step and scored. But, Monk was pushing the pace and finding Maxime running the court for a layup. He had the big fast break dunk. Precious Achiuwa was doing a very good job of punishing the cross matches. He's shown some really nice offensive touch since he's come to Sacramento. He had 2 really nice takes to the rim in the first quarter and would do the same a little later on in the game as well. He also hit a corner 3. Maxime Renaud found him on the short roll. So Precious coming out hot with a quick 7 points. The bench just did a great job of pushing the pace, forcing cross matches, taking advantage of that. Zach Edey went out in that portion of the game, and that was obviously a big part of why the Kings were able to go on that run. But you also had Jaren still in the game at that point. And the Kings were able to go from a 9-point deficit to a 4-point lead. Nick Clifford hit a 3 with that group. The only real bad thing you can say about that group was they couldn't hit a free throw. The past couple of games, the Kings haven't been able to hit free throws. They went 13 for 22 from the free throw line in a game that they lost by 8 points. So that definitely hurts. I was having a great time just watching the rookies, watching Max, watching Nick get after it on the defensive end. I thought Max was having a great rebounding game, battling inside. He drew a loose ball foul on Zach Edey, going after the offensive glass. And then Nick Clifford, he had a possession where he drove inside and lost the handle, turned it over, out of bounds. What does he do the next play on the defensive end? He makes up for it right away by drawing a charge. These guys were getting after it, and the only thing that you can really critique them on is foul trouble. Max ended up fouling out of the game very late because he intentionally fouled with 30 seconds left. Nick also had his foul troubles in the second half. So those are the things that they need to clean up, but I loved the energy that they were playing with. Towards the middle of the second quarter, when the starters started to come back in, DeMar DeRozan came back into the game. A lot of the Kings' half-court offense was just give the ball to DeRozan and have him post up. And he created some good shots and had some kickouts to Keegan for open threes that Keegan missed. But it just was not great offense. The offense wasn't moving. It was very stagnant. It was just DeMar DeRozan getting the ball. We didn't see a lot of Keegan getting the ball in the first half. We didn't see a lot of ball movement in the half court. We just continue to see the Kings struggle to generate any offense in the half court. It was just DeMar having an okay scoring game in the first half, Levine scoring pretty well, and then Malik Monk off the bench providing a big scoring boost. But other than that, like I said, Russell Westbrook was struggling. He was also struggling defensively. He was falling asleep. He fouled Santi Aldama on a 3, and that was his 3rd foul. He made some nice interior passes. His passing is always going to be there, but he was definitely having a rough game. And the Kings ended that first half down 3. Levine had 14 points, but it was too much DeMar, not enough involvement from Keegan, and not enough Keon, especially Keon and Nick Clifford as well in the second quarter. When things went so well for the Kings in the second half of that first quarter when the bench came in, and then they just completely went away from it. And Keon never saw the court again in the entire game, which I didn't see that coming. But Monk was amazing in that first half. 10 points, 4 rebounds, 3 assists, a steal, and a block. Great energy, great pace. And the bench was carrying the team. One pretty interesting stat from that first half is the Kings were 3 for 8 from 3. 8 3-point attempts. That is not a lot. In transition, they were scoring a lot in the paint, and that's great, but you need to be able to generate some 3-point attempts, and a lot of them not being able to generate those 3-point attempts is how stagnant the half-court offense was. For the Grizzlies in that first half, Edey had 14 and 9. Jalen Wells and Cam Spencer had 13 each. The start of the third quarter, no doubt for me, was the most frustrating part of this game because it felt like the Kings were kind of asleep offensively. They were walking through their sets, kind of sleepwalking, jogging through them, kind of had an idea of, a play that they wanted to run to get Zach LaVine open from 3, but it just didn't feel like their hearts were in it. They weren't running hard in the half court offense. And then defensively, they weren't able to get stops. And again, the Kings half court offense sucks. They were generating most of their offense in transition. And so when you're not getting stops, you're not generating that offense in transition. And so you start out with, I think it was a 6-0 run for the Grizzlies before the Kings called timeout, but I think it ended up being a 10-0 run for the Grizzlies before the Kings finally scored. And the Kings scoring was just DeMar DeRozan creating a three for himself in the corner on a mismatch with Zach Edey. Edey and Jaren were just running them over in the paint. And the offense, there was just no penetration. It was Westbrook handling the ball, just kind of standing there, dribbling, waiting for LaVine and Keegan to do their thing, for Keegan to set the screen for LaVine. And it was just all so slow and so telegraphed. And then late in the shot clock, they would just chuck up a bad jumper. So again, the offense didn't really get going until the bench came into the game. Max came into the game, and I didn't like how he immediately passed up a wide open three as Edey completely sagged off of him. He just needs to shoot that. Even if he doesn't make it, he just needs to show that he's willing to shoot that. And even in the fourth quarter, he did the same. He did take 1 3, but when Zach Edey's just playing so far off of him, I just want him to shoot that. Just to show that he's willing to shoot it, to make Edey play that differently. But Maxime got into foul trouble, had his 4th foul with 2 of them coming on moving screens. But it was Keegan that finally started to get his offense going in the third quarter. He only had 1 bucket in the first half. Finally got downhill for his second bucket. He had been taking a lot of threes, missing them fairly badly, and hadn't really attacked all the way to the rim. We'd seen him kind of make some efforts, but then either settle in the mid-range or just kick it back out and just not be super aggressive against a set Grizzlies defense. And I think a lot of that is early on in the game, he got blocked at the rim by Zach Edey. And he's trying to go up against a defensive player of the year in Jaren Jackson Jr. plus Zach Edey behind him. So that's tough, especially if the offense is stagnant. It's tough to get all the way to the rim. But we finally saw him get to the rim and get a bucket. And I think that's a good learning experience for him, finding ways to finish around the rim, because we saw him go a lot to his floater and get the ball up and over a shot blocker. So that was good to see. The Grizzlies had gone up 13 points, but then the Kings had a run, had a response. Keegan getting downhill for his second bucket, Malik Monk driving and finishing over the defense, and then Zach LaVine getting a steal, getting out in transition, and scoring to pull within 8 and force the Grizzlies into a timeout. So it was a good response, again, with the bench unit kind of coming in, Malik Monk, Precious Achiuwa coming in, and giving them some energy. They were picking up loose balls, picking up steals, offensive rebound from Precious Achiuwa, scoring in transition. That bench energy just coming through, and after the timeout, it continued, and they got within 4 points. And that's when they finally started to knock down the 3 ball after hitting only 3 in the first half on 8 attempts. Then they knocked down 3 in very quick succession towards the end of that third quarter. DeMar hitting 2 of them, Malik hitting 1 of them. The defensive effort was great, knocking the ball away from Zach Edey a lot, or drawing loose ball fouls. Precious drew an over the back foul on Zach Edey. Keegan did a good job in help of knocking the ball away from Edey, and Keegan had a monster defensive game stats wise. 5 steals and 3 blocks is crazy. And we saw the Kings end the final 3 minutes and 34 seconds of that third quarter on a 17-3 run. Instead of Keon Ellis coming into the game with the bench unit, we saw the Kings go with DeMar DeRozan and Keegan Murray instead, playing with the bench unit, and then Maxime Renaud was out for foul trouble. So it was DeMar and Keegan playing with that bench unit. Keegan didn't come out of the game until like the 8 or 9 minute mark of the fourth quarter, but he was everywhere defensively, blocking Jaren Jackson Jr. But I think you could see he started to get gassed a little bit, and towards the end, like right before he got subbed out, the Grizzlies started to go on a run, and then they continued it after he got subbed out. It was an 11-0 run for the Grizzlies in that fourth quarter. The Kings went down as much as 8, including it was after the Cam Spencer just 3 bouncing off the front of the rim, the luckiest bounce of all time. The Grizzlies just started to get out in transition and generate cross matches. And that's really tough. When you're already struggling in the half court to defend a guy like Zach Edey or Jaren Jackson Jr. this size, then when you get cross matched, it's even worse. It was Russell Westbrook and DeMar DeRozan to respond to that run from the Grizzlies. Westbrook had an and one, then DeMar went on a quick 6-point run of his own and also drew a moving screen to get the Kings back within 2 points. So the Kings were within 2, and that's when we kind of got into the end game. And that's when the Grizzlies started to go a lot to Jaren Jackson Jr. in the isolation matched up with Maxime Renaud. And that first possession was rough because Max just got completely dunked on. And that happened a couple of times. It was not a good matchup for Max and probably a big learning experience for him trying to guard a guy like Jaren Jackson Jr. in isolation. LaVine did make a nice defensive play the second time they tried to go to that isolation, where he jumped the passing lane and got a steal. And that generated an easy look for Malik Monk. LaVine also hit a three. The Kings were able to get the lead back, go up 2. But then you had Maxime Renaud fouling KCP on a 3. That was rough. And down the stretch, it was just the Kings not being able to get enough stops inside on Zach Edey, on Jaren Jackson Jr. They were not able to keep them out of the paint enough. Keegan did all he could on the offensive end. He had a nice floater, had a steal, and drew a foul on Jaren in transition. Then he had a nice drive to find Maxime under the rim with a really nice pass, which I love to see from Keegan, and Max drew the foul. But the Kings couldn't hit their free throws. Both Keegan and Max missed a free throw each down the stretch. Again, the Kings were just not able to get enough stops. They ended with Malik Monk, Zach LaVine, DeMar DeRozan, Keegan Murray, and Maxime Renaud. And I think that's the right unit to end with. I have no problems with that. But they weren't able to get enough stops. They missed some crucial free throws. They missed a crucial 3 in Maxime Renaud missing a 3. And then after he missed that, he really wouldn't look at the rim again. At least not from deep. He did have a nice floater after that. But, he just wouldn't shoot that 3. And that let Zach Edey kind of sink back into the paint, which made life tougher on the Kings offensively. And the Grizzlies were just able to pull away late. The Kings now move to 5-16 on the season. We can go through some of the box scores. I'll start with some of the positive performances. We're mainly going to look at the bench for that. When we look at the bench, the worst plus minus off the bench was Maxime Renaud with a +6. Then you look at the starting unit, and it's DeRozan with a -9, but then the next best is Keegan with a -20. So a very big difference in terms of the plus minus from the bench and the starting unit. Malik Monk off the bench had 21 points, 8 for 17 from the field, 6 rebounds, 6 assists, 2 steals, 2 blocks. He had a very good defensive game. He was super active, and that was a key part to the Kings going on multiple runs when he came into the game, was his activity on the defensive end. And I especially loved when him and Keon Ellis were both in the game together, and their activity on that defensive end together was very noticeable. Keon only played the 6 minutes, but I did think his defense was noticeable when he was in the game. He missed both of his free throws that he took, and that's been a problem for him, at least in the last couple of games. Sticking with the bench, we'll just go through all the bench guys. Precious had 24 minutes, 11 points, 7 rebounds, had a great scoring punch to begin this game in the first quarter. Obviously struggled when he was put at the center position against Zach Edey, who has like a foot on him. Obviously not fully a foot, but it might as well be. But Precious continues to impress me with his touch around the rim, and he hit a 3. Did go 0 for 2 from the free throw line, but he had 3 offensive rebounds. So yeah, he just continues to add good things to this team. Renaud had 23 minutes, 9 points, 6 rebounds, 3 assists, had a couple of turnovers, and fouled out of the game. But I loved how he was battling on the interior for these rebounds. I like his activity on the defensive end with his hands. I want to see him shoot more 3s if he's left wide open. He doesn't need to force them, but if he's going to be wide open like he was in this game, I do want to see him get up more than 1 3. But we continue to see Max get meaningful minutes and play down the stretch of games. That's exciting. And so I'm very happy that he's getting those opportunities, and he's looking solid. And then finishing off the bench, Nick Clifford had 13 minutes, 5 points, hit a 3, took a charge, struggled with foul trouble with 4 fouls, but I thought it was a solid game from him. Then going to the starting lineup, the 3 guys in the starting lineup that had more positive games were Keegan Murray, DeMar DeRozan, and Zach LaVine. Russell Westbrook went 1 for 10 from the field for 3 points. Of course, he's going to stuff the stat sheet. Like I said after the last game, he's always going to do stuff. We know that. But he went 0 for 4 from 3 and thought he had a pretty poor defensive game, not chasing around screens, falling asleep at times. So not his finest game. And then Drew Eubanks, again, 15 minutes. Yeah, he had 4 points, a couple of dunks, but he didn't do much and he wasn't good defensively. Keegan had a really tough offensive game in the first half, but turned it around in the second. Went 0 for 4 from 3. A lot of those either in the first half or at the start of the second half. And then he kind of went into attack mode at the end of the third quarter and the fourth quarter. I liked that a lot more. I thought there was just, too much stagnation on the Kings offensively, too much DeMar DeRozan and not enough getting Keegan involved in the offense. It wasn't until we saw him playing more with the bench unit in the second half that we saw him really start to thrive. And he ended with 12 points on 5 for 12 from the field, 5 steals, 3 blocks, a menace defensively like he always is. And then DeMar had 23 points, add in 3 steals, and LaVine had 19 points, add in 3 steals. I thought LaVine had a pretty solid game. There were definitely a few times, especially at the start of the third quarter, where I wanted him to be more aggressive attacking the rim. But I thought he was competing defensively and provided solid scoring punch. And then DeMar, was big in the second half in terms of his scoring, but I do think we saw a little too much of the ball in his hands at times. And so with the Kings really struggling against Zach Edey here, it doesn't get much easier as they have to play in Houston on Wednesday. Houston, of course, a massive team. They're 13-4 in the season. They have Steven Adams, who, he's not the scorer that Zach Edey is, but he's going to be a menace on the offensive glass. But where the Kings could really get hurt is the turnovers in their half-court offense. If they're not able to get out and transition a lot, then they are going to be killed by this Rockets defense because the Rockets are then going to get out and transition and score on them. The Kings really need to reduce the turnovers, and we need to see something from this half-court offense. We need to see the ball moving better because it hasn't been good all season. And against this Rockets team, you're just not going to score on them if you're not moving the ball. But anyways, that is it for this episode of the Roll Report. I will be back on Wednesday to recap the game against the Houston Rockets, so I will see you guys then. Peace.